So, what if I told you that the way most of us study is actually one of the least effective ways to learn? Today, we are going to dig into the science of learning to uncover a really powerful technique that can honestly change everything about how you prepare for your next big exam.
Oh, we have all been there, right? You spend hours and hours highlighting, rereading your notes. You feel super confident. You feel like you know this stuff inside and out. But then, when it's time to actually, use that knowledge, poof, it's just gone. It is an incredibly frustrating cycle.
Well, it turns out that feeling of fluency you get from just rereading your notes, it's often just an illusion. We mistake being familiar with the words on the page for actually understanding the concepts and having them locked in our long-term memory. And the data? Well, it shows just how many of us make this mistake.
Now check this out. What's really wild here is how one single strategy completely dominates. Research shows that a whopping 80% of people, that's 4 out of 5 of us, default to just rereading our notes or the textbook. I mean, look at the other methods. Even flashcards and self-testing, they're used by less than half the population. So, rereading is king. But the question is, should it be? Well, the science says that to truly learn, we need to embrace something that feels, well, a little less comfortable.
And this brings us to a key concept, an idea from psychologist Robert Bjork called desirable difficulties. It's this thought that making the learning process a little harder, a little more effortful, actually forces your brain to build stronger, more lasting connections. See, easy learning is often forgettable learning. So, where do we find one of these powerful, desirable difficulties? Turns out, it's in a place you'd least expect it.
Section 1. Testing's secret identity. Yeah, it turns out tests are way more than just a way to get a grade. We're about to totally reframe something that for most of us is a huge source of anxiety.
For most of our lives, tests have been about one thing: assessment, a final judgment on what you know. But cognitive psychologists have found that the very act of trying to pull information from your memory is one of the most powerful learning tools there is. It's not just checking how much fuel is in the tank, it's the process that actually fills it up.
So this is the big question, isn't it? When you take the most popular study strategy in the world and you pit it against the desirable difficulty of a test, which one actually creates real long-term learning?
All right, Section 2, the long-term payoff. And luckily for us, there's a huge study that gives us a crystal clear answer.
So in this landmark 2006 study, they set out to really isolate the power of testing. They took a group of students, gave them a passage to learn, and then split them into 2 different groups.
The setup was just so simple, but brilliant. Both groups had the exact same amount of time with the material. Okay? Group 1 got to study and then study again. That's our classic rereading strategy. Group 2 studied once and then, instead of rereading, they spent the rest of their time just trying to write down everything they could remember. No feedback, nothing. Just the act of trying to recall it.
Okay, so, right after the session, who's your money on? The group that just got to see all the material for a second time, or the group that had to struggle to remember it?
Well, just 5 minutes later, the rereaders actually did a little better. They recalled about 81% of the information. And this explains everything, right? This is why rereading feels so effective. It gives you this immediate short-term boost and this false sense of confidence. But here is where the story gets really, really interesting. The researchers weren't just curious about what you could remember a few minutes later. They wanted to know what would actually stick. So they brought everyone back a week later.
And this is the moment where the power of the testing effect becomes impossible to ignore. After 1 week, the results didn't just change, they completely flipped on their head. The testing group, the ones who struggled to recall the information, remembered a staggering 35% more than the group that just passively reread the text. That desirable difficulty, it paid off big time.
Section 3, your learning mindset. Okay, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. So if testing is so much better, why do 80% of us still go back to rereading? Well, the answer might have less to do with study tactics and more to do with our deep-down beliefs about learning itself. Research actually suggests that our choice of study strategy is deeply tied to our beliefs about whether intelligence is something that's fixed or something that can actually grow. So, someone with a fixed mindset tends to believe you're either smart or you're not, and that's that. For them, having to struggle or put in a lot of effort is kind of a sign that you just don't have what it takes. But on the flip side, someone with a growth mindset believes that intelligence is changeable. They see effort not as a weakness, but as the actual path that makes you smarter. And here's where it all clicks together.
Researchers found that it's the people with a growth mindset who are way more likely to appreciate the struggle, that desirable difficulty of self-testing. They understand that the struggle of retrieval isn't a sign you're failing. It's the feeling of effective learning actually happening.
Okay, last section, how to learn better. So we've seen the evidence, right? But believe it or not, the benefits of testing go even deeper than just remembering what was on the test. There are these incredible ripple effects. It turns out that when you force your brain to retrieve a piece of information, you're not just strengthening that one little fact. You're actually fundamentally reorganizing your knowledge, and that leads to some amazing and totally unexpected side effects.
Think about it in 3 steps. Okay, step 1, the main effect. You build way stronger memories for the stuff you were actually tested on. We saw that in the experiment. But step 2, and this is where it gets crazy, is that testing also boosts your memory for related things you weren't even tested on. The effort of pulling out some information strengthens the whole web of knowledge. And then step 3, what scientists call the prospective effect, testing literally primes your brain to learn new, related information more easily in the future. It builds a better mental framework for knowledge to stick to. So it's not just about remembering the past, it's about preparing your brain for the future.
So, the takeaway here is pretty clear. The comfortable, easy, passive act of rereading, it just gives us an illusion of knowing. But real, lasting learning comes from the effortful, active process of retrieval. It's a desirable difficulty that pays off in massive ways. So, the only question left is, are you ready to change how you learn